following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Welcome to The People's View, a program dedicated to discussing local, state, and national issues and their effect on the American people. The People's View provides a platform for state representatives and national figures to present their viewpoint. Whether it's social, economic, or financial topics, you'll hear it on The People's View.
Hello, this is Carl Seidel, the host on The People's View. The People's View is sponsored by the Nashua Republican City Committee, and we have a website, nashuagop.org, to look at all the activities that the Republican organization in Nashua runs. And we'll talk about more later, but right now we're going to talk to Senator Luther, or I guess ex-Senator Luther, who now has a radio show, and maybe he can tell us how he's gotten into that activity and what he wants to do with it.
Well, you know, November came and went, and didn't win. And I thought, okay, what am I going to do? And I love media. I love this process, and I've wanted to engage the issues. And there was an opportunity at WSMN, and you know, Pete Silva, who was a good friend of ours, had the show, and I sort of had some experience with it. I thought, well, I'll give this a shot. And so we started over there at the beginning of January, so we're just wrapping up 6 months, and we went to 2 days a week, so we're doing Tuesday and Thursday mornings at 9 to 10, and I love it. I absolutely love it. It's called The Intersection with Jim Luther. So the way we talk about it is, Carl, we call it The Intersection because we look at the intersection between politics, business, personal finance and investing, and family and community. So and then we look at it from a local level all the way to a national level. We don't, more state and national, but we'll deal with those issues because nothing operates in a vacuum. They're all interconnected, as you know.
Right.
We've both served in Concord. And I had, as being engaged in so many of the issues, really thinking about those. And I think for a lot of folks who have been part of this process, you'd like to stay engaged, and I'm thrilled. I'm having a great time, and we just did a show this morning on the immigration reform bill in the Senate, and had a great show on that, and it's been a lot of fun.
Do you get good feedback from your audience on
We get some. We're not. What we tried to do, Carl, is we don't really encourage a lot of call-in right now, because what I find, and maybe I'm a little selfish about this, is that hour goes by awful quick.
It does.
And what we're trying to do is, and this is how we describe the show, obviously it's going to be a conservative slant. We're not going to apologize for that. We're trying to inform, really, our listeners and folks beyond that to reach out about the issues and get them engaged in the process. And so what we want to go is we want to do a deep dive into the issues. So we're not going to bounce around. So normally we're going to have one main guest, or maybe a couple of guests who on the same issue. Sometimes we'll do two different guests. And we really want to have that time to go into some detail on that.
So you have a Facebook, though. Do you get any feedback from your
show
on your Facebook?
Oh, yeah, we do, absolutely. Yeah, we'll get, even today there was a woman said, hey, she tried to call in, and there's limited lines, and then she gave me some feedback as far as some issues, and I'll get other comments. And I'll publicize the show, who the guest is, and get feedback, hey, really looking forward to hearing that, and comments afterwards, that sort of thing. So I've had a pretty good sense what the brand was going to be, and what we've really found is that it's really resonating with people who say, I'm really enjoying the show.
Good.
And it has a pretty good reach. I mean, WSMN, it'll go down pretty much Route 3 down to Lowell, maybe a little bit farther south, and up a little farther north of Manchester and east, and not so much west. So you got a lot of people, obviously, on Everett Turnpike who are going to pick it up, and then also online. And we publicize that because I use the social media to let people know about the show. And they can also listen live online. And then all the shows are archived, so they can listen to them later. There's a lot of people, especially it's not drive time, it's 9 to 10. So we just say, look, go ahead and listen to the show later.
Yeah,
we're trying to inform the issues Because my goal is not just to do radio for radio's sake. What I'm trying to do is really inform people, because I think one of the themes, Carl, you and I have talked about this in the past, is does the average citizen really know the issues? And I think I'm concerned they don't.
I think you're right.
Yeah, so what we're trying to do, and I'll tell you, it's interesting how we can, because people say, why, you're doing politics, I understand that, but like personal finance and investing, how does that fit in? We say, well, look, when you've got, basically Washington is, we got debt of $7 trillion, where we've got some real challenges here. What we're trying to say to our listeners is, look, you've got to be self-sufficient in this environment. And so we're trying to inform our listeners how to take care of themselves. So I've had a woman on the show, Mary Murphy, who's with Charles Schwab, and I have an investment background, and I find a lot of people don't really understand how to do money management. So we try to give folks a sense for that, because we sort of kid with people, say, look, if you're planning to retire on Social Security, you're dreaming, man. It's, so you look at these programs that are under stress. What we're trying to do is both inform but also equip people. And one of the other things that I enjoy doing is talking about economics. And people go, you're kidding me. It's like, they call it the dismal science, But we try to put it in everyday terms that people can understand, because it's like breathing. I mean, you got to understand, or the law of gravity. If you don't understand the laws of physics and you break a law, like you go into too much debt in your own household, you're going to have a problem. That's kind of the way it works. You can't, well, I'm not going to believe in that, we'll be fine. It's not going to work. I'll just ignore that. Ignore those credit card statements coming every month. And so we try to give people a sense of how that works and bring it down to a personal level, kitchen table level, so that folks have a sense of, well, like for instance, we'll talk about GDP. And people, oh, gee, I don't want to hear about this. But we talk about it, okay, let's talk about it at a family level. What would GDP be like? So when we hear that growth in GDP, which just was announced the other day, 1.8%, people go, well, what does that mean? Well, that's not a good number.
No.
That's a bad number. And they say, what is GDP? So we explain that, for a family, that it's basically your whole income, it's what you produce, and if you're spending more than you have money coming in, that's a problem. Well, we do it all the time as a nation, and you can't keep doing that forever. And you see this really a difference in ideology as far as thinking. For instance, we saw in the state budget a big push for Medicaid expansion. So we spent a whole show on that just a couple weeks ago, dealing with that, and really just blowing that argument out of the water, that this is, as Peggy Gilmore, who I've traded the Senate seat with her, she said on the Senate floor, it's the right thing to do. Well, okay, why? So we went through all of the economic arguments. I had Charlie Arlinghouse on for.
Oh, did you?
Oh, yeah.
He wrote a beautiful article.
He's great. So, and he's great about it. That dry. But to look at and say, yeah, it might sound good on the surface. It doesn't work. I mean, yeah, we can talk about compassion, but who's paying the bills here?
Yeah.
So we go through and we try to explain more detail than you're going to get in a typical show, but make it entertaining. We have fun. It's humorous. Now, we're dealing with a lot of that now. As we get more into the summer, we're going to do some lighter shows and some fun shows. I'm going to highlight more businesses. Like there's a great bakery on Main Street. We're going to have them in and talk about. But what I like to talk about is the whole story. Okay, so for instance, we had Fulcino Vineyard in.
Oh,
Al Fulcino,
nice.
who is a good friend of mine in Hollis, and talk about what I think is really a fascinating story. Here's a business.
Yeah.
It's not just doing this for fun, and they're doing great. I mean, they're booked out months as far as their supply, in essence, is already pretty much spoken for. Here's a local vineyard, not just a winery. So they actually are growing the grapes, and a lot of red grapes, no less, which is pretty unusual for this part of New England. But we get into the whole story. So I say, well, okay, tell me about how'd you get into this, Al? So we talk about the whole story, why he's excited about that, get into the business issues. And I just find that people are fascinating. So you got somebody who's doing that kind of thing as a business owner, they're going to have a fascinating story. And if I can lead that person through it with some interesting questions, I think it's a great experience, for the listeners. So we try to mix it up with those sorts of things.
Does that lead you into any way thinking about getting back into politics and helping them out with legislation?
Well, Carl, it's a ways. Well, it depends on how you measure time, right?
Yeah.
But as of now, I don't have any plans. I've had people, ask me, but I have actually told the state party that as of now, you ought to be looking
Moved
for
on.
another candidate for what would be Senate District 12, and there's some folks that are looking at it. It's, as you know, it's a tough job, especially in the Senate. It's a very, very demanding business, and frankly, I'm enjoying what I'm doing right now. So
Good.
anything can change. I mean, we'll see where it goes, but the issues still grip me. But here's the other thing for me, Carl, is we're dealing as much of the time with national issues as we are with state issues. And I find for myself, I'm kind of a strategic guy, for better or worse. Sometimes it can be a frustration. So some of the state issues would frankly be, I'd rather look at some of the bigger issues. And that's just me. Other people are going to look at different.
Well, you
different
picked on
focuses.
immigration. That's one of the biggest ones right
So
now.
it's a big one. Well,
And today's vote is.
That's right. So we got into the whole flow of, we really went into the bill. So I've spent hours researching the bill. I read
you?
good parts of. Well, this is the fun thing, Carl. I'm learning more doing this, even than when I was probably in the Senate, because every show, you think about it, if you're trying to do a quality show, you want to become as much as you can an expert on that topic. Because what I want to do is engage the guest or guests as thoughtfully as possible on the issue, instead of just general, well, tell me about yourself, why is this issue important, blah, 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 how's life, I mean, that's dull. So I want to get into what are really some of the big issues. And then also, as a questioner, as a host, it's your job to really gently guide that discussion. So there's times where obviously the guest is going to be very knowledgeable about the topic, but I'm trying to get a sense of, okay, we got this much time for the segment, we're coming up on a break, I want to be able to bring this to a break, or maybe we got somebody calling in, or blah, blah. And also to crystallize that point.
Yeah.
So you said 3 points, now you mentioned 1 and 2. What was that third one? Because say they get off track, so I want to bring that back and do it in a very natural way. And I enjoy that, because I enjoy conversation more than writing. I can write, but I would be a pretty bad blogger. I mean, I'd be better doing the shows, So.
Well, can you give me a couple of examples of what you found in that bill that might be not usually discussed?
Where would you like to start?
I mean, I heard that there's a lot of pork in there, too.
Well, there's a lot of pork. I mean, like, for instance, Harry Reid has got a nice little thing in there for the Las Vegas casinos, for tourism.
That's good for
$100 million.
immigration.
$100 million that are going to this. Well, it's not just for the casinos in Las Vegas, but this is going towards this tourism marketing program. $100 million over 4 years. Big chunk of it goes, though, to his, obviously, Nevada. So, anyway, here's the issue for me, Carl. I think that there's quite a few issues. Let's talk about the economic issues. We've got still a very soft job market, labor market. And what we're saying is we want to significantly increase the labor pool. Does that make sense? I mean, when in essence we have a lot of young people in this country who are struggling to find any kind of job, who are saddled with a lot of debt, and we're basically saying that we've got, the estimates are 11 to 12 million illegal aliens in the country, and what they're saying, pretty much analysis, they're saying that probably 7 to 8 million of those people would be able to get onto a path towards citizenship, okay? Now, there's 4.5 million right now in the immigration process going through the legal immigrant. So this will be another 7 on top of that. The United States, we rank #1 in the world for taking in immigrants my understanding, I'll have to check this, but I believe we take in more than 50% of all the immigrants in the world, just the United States.
Yeah.
Now, I understand we're an immigrant nation. I think it's great, but I believe, again, that there has to be a process of, in essence, synthesizing people, getting them into the culture, that there's an understanding of what we do. These are big numbers, Carl. And if you look at ICE, immigration and customs enforcement, or whatever that is, they are stretched to the limit. I mean, if you look at borders, just jumping around, if you look at the the folks protecting the border on the southern border, they can't do their job. They don't have enough folks. And the number of additional people who would be added to this is not enough to get the job done. And the folks, the actual officers for ICE, have come out publicly against the bill. They say this bill doesn't work.
Yeah.
Now, these are the folks on the ground. They ought to know. Now, we hear these numbers about we've got all these towers and helicopters and all these numbers, but this is a huge border we're talking about here.
And people, I don't think, realize how barren it is. In
Absolutely. And if we're going to talk about this, I mean, for instance, I don't know if you heard this story, Carl. I mean, Al-Qaeda is always looking for a hole.
Sure.
And a bigger border we've got is with Canada. Now, Canada obviously is probably slightly more stable. You don't have the drug problems that you do. Not all of Mexico, but obviously that's become a bigger story. But Al-Qaeda has really been looking at, is there a way where they could bring in pieces of a dirty atomic bomb across the border? Sure. And they're actually talking more about Canada, okay? Right. So these are border security issues. And I think we go back to what is the #1 role of our federal government? It's to protect its citizens. So you've got the safety issue, I think, and again, the economic argument, I think that these are big, big numbers. Here's another issue. There's this word emergency that is in the bill hundreds of times, that this is an emergency. Now, the reason they did that is that they can get all the funding they need for all these programs. None of them are budgeted, okay? But we'll get all these, but we're talking billions, hundreds of billions of dollars that's going to go into making this thing happen. It's just going to continue to increase the deficit. Let's talk about the CBO report. You can tell I've been looking at the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office. They came out with their analysis of the immigration bill, and the supporters of the bill, I refer to them as the 8 gangsters instead of the gang of 8, you know, because I'm not crazy about how they pushed this through. Because Harry Reid is really, I mean, you know, was voted on today. It was, I think they really pushed this through way too quick. I mean, the bill's over 1,000 pages long. The Corker Amendment, which was the border security amendment, that's over 100 pages by itself. And the senators had 2 days to just go through the Corker Amendment and then say, okay, you got to vote on this thing. And so I think that there's real issues with that. So this emergency thing, again, was just stuffed in the bill. It's all over the place. And it's, I mean, I could go on and on. But again, I think that we have to look at, it's kind of like the goose and the golden egg. If you overwhelm the goose, it can't keep pumping out the golden eggs. And the problem is the goose is the economy. And if we don't have an economy that can take care of the people that are already in the country, we're not going to be able to take care of the rest. Now, what they say in the CBO report is that with this bit, with the border security issue component, it would only decrease illegal immigration by 25% in the future. So we've got 11.5 million illegal aliens right now. They're saying at least there'll be another 5 million. They're going to come in. Yeah, well, the family members, okay, that can be attached. They can, we talk about magnet. That was a term that was used during the presidential debates. I think the bill, in a way, in its current form in the Senate, is a magnet for that. And I believe in immigration, but again, I think that we've got to look at, this nation has got to be a place of opportunity and hope for every citizen. And if we just overwhelm the system.
That's right.
And there's a lot, you look at the deficit, you look at so many of these issues, you look at Social Security, which is going to bankrupt in a few years, Medicare. Again, you've got all these things which are really in tough shape, and now we're saying we're going to add this on top of it. I think it's got a lot of issues.
No, I agree with you there. I can't see why it takes so long for people who have been in line before they get their citizenship. Well, that part of it flows kind of slowly anyway. And now you're doubling the amount of people that are going to be in that line.
And the issue, and I put this up on my Facebook page today, is that they would have to either hire, they would have to explode the immigration system as far as the number of new people just to process all these folks. Or they're going to have to accelerate the process to meet these numbers and not do the due diligence on these people. Another thing is that these folks will not be required to be part of Obamacare. So as a provisional citizen, a provisional resident, forget the exact acronym, I'm like, wait a minute. we're going to have to, I mean, there's a lot of these sort of problems in the bill, and I just, pass the Senate. I think it's going to be a very different story in the House.
Well, maybe if we get rid of the IRS and put them on the border, we
Well,
could do
that's
something more useful.
Well, if we can get them to admit anything, they keep taking the fifth. Another guy before the House today did the same
Oh,
thing.
really? I didn't know that.
I mean, he didn't, and not like Lois Lerner, who started and then took the, this guy started right up front. But I'm like, we got to get some answers here. Or the bogus thing where they're saying that that the targeting was just as much against progressives.
Oh, yeah.
Well, this has been debunked because
Yeah,
the IG,
right.
he's already said that's not true. So it just.
So we're getting a lot of garbage as a message.
There's a lot, yeah. I mean, it's.
And people don't, I don't know, that, they keep on saying, well, we're investigating, and then 6 months later, well, that's old news. Forget
Well,
about
this is
it.
it. Well, I mean, we've sort of been saying this on the show. We said it's the trifecta of scandals. We're up to like octecta. I don't know how many numbers. I mean, they just keep going. But I mean, obviously the IRS, they haven't admitted anything. They will not. They just won't. They won't do it. And I think they treat both the legislature, the House, because they've been primarily testifying before them, with really disdain. Like, why do we even need to deal with you? As if there's no accountability. Well, wait a minute. I believe that the legislature has oversight here. I mean,
maybe that's what they have to do, is cut the funding. Something
well,
like
well,
that.
the problem, as you know, Carl, is you got to have both. You got to have both chambers. And now, if President Obama, he wants to take the House in 2014, which is highly unlikely. You look at the numbers, but like for instance, the House passed the bill to shut down Obama care, but you got to have the Senate too. And under Harry Reid's control, not going to happen. So it's.
I don't think there's any hope to get enough senators in there.
I think there is. I really think that if you look at I believe there's 11 seats that I've heard these numbers.
Yeah,
I'm not
the
really
Democrats
that are
vulnerable.
there's an opportunity.
Yeah.
We wouldn't win all those, but I think there's an opportunity to you look at the vote in Massachusetts. I mean, this guy, I mean, has been in there. Talk about a career politician. I mean, they just keep. It's
I've
like
dealt with
restamp
them,
them. Okay,
yeah.
just slide them in, and I don't know. It's a there's days, Carl. I'm sure you're engaged in this. You sort of go, I just need to take a break from this. I was on vacation last week. It was interesting. It's up in Maine, and I don't know if you know how the budget is going in Maine. Not as well as it is in New Hampshire. The governor vetoed the budget, and he's a real. He's a solid guy who's saying that we don't want to increase taxes, unlike our governor here, who, not that she would increase taxes, but she says that was a fiscally responsive budget. I dare to differ with her on that, but in Maine, it's a very contentious process up there. So
well, Maine's the other example that Arlinghouse used for the
that's right.
expansion of
exactly, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
and that's what he would say. He would say that, look, what the proponents of expanding Medicaid are saying, if you look at it, great. If it works, this is great. I mean, I think we could all say we would love to provide all the services that can be provided, but does it, in other states where they've done similar programs, has it worked? It hasn't. So it's like, I think we got some empirical data here, Carl, that this may be a problem.
I don't understand why some of the people haven't brought that up. I mean, Arlinghouse made it very clear that the only people that moved when they did that were people that already had insurance.
That's right.
And they moved on to the Medicare, and the people that didn't have insurance,
Medicaid,
basic Medicaid, didn't move.
Right. So I mean,
still had the same number.
It's interesting, Carl. I'm reading a book by Mark Levin called Emeritopia. I mentioned this on the show the other day. Have you heard of Mark Levin? He's one of the big conservative guys, and I just bumped into this book, and I do a lot of stuff on my e-reader, with the Kindle and all that. And it's a fascinating book because what he goes through is sort of and this is my point, is that you have two different ideologies or views of how things work, how community and society ought to work, and then how government is to operate within that. And so he looks at what's called the sort of this Emeritopia, which is utopian view, and more of a conservative view. And it's very interesting, and I'm reading this, and really just learning some, because summer's a good time to sort of do some reading. So I'm reading this, And he goes back and he says, to the roots of progressive thinking. And I had never really thought about this. It really goes back to Plato. I mean, all the way back to Greece. And that's where the utopian mindset started. And it's continued. And what's interesting, though, Aristotle, his student, debunked him. Like he said, this. So, and then you go on and on and on, and then even he looks at the communist model, Karl Marx, not so much some of the more recent approaches, and then he just says, without really giving sort of a commentary, he says, look, these are the main principles of communism. Do these sound familiar? And it's not like I'm a conspiracy guy. I'm just looking, this looks awfully familiar to that ideology. Now, what's interesting about the utopian mindset is it's sort of this philosophical view. Okay, we can construct a society which has a nirvana, we can make this thing work.
Perfect, yeah.
But the mechanisms are so complicated, it would never work.
No.
But you can dream this up in your mind. And that's the thing. And that's what I see with a lot of folks who have a progressive mindset. They're well-intentioned. They've got a lot of compassion. They see the needs, and they're looking at this view. And they're not, some of the pieces are not grounded in reality. They're not grounded in economic reality. They're not grounded in societal reality. And so you have this perspective, like for instance, unlimited resources. So we don't have enough revenue, well, we're going to find more revenue.
That's right.
So there isn't a sense of living within our means or, what's the revenue numbers we're going to live with. We're going to find, so we kid around and we say there's always more revenue, it's just in our pockets, it's, citizens' pockets. And it's that sense of where this is, and that's, whereas the conservative ideology is one of sort of self-independence, hard work, entrepreneurial activity, with a community, with a community focus. I'm looking out for my neighbor. But there's much, in essence, it's closer to home. It's more of a small.
Well, I think it's working too with independent thoughts. People are not the same. You can't get everybody. You can't. Well, I don't think you can make a one type thing that everybody wants to do.
That's
it's
right.
kind of hard. Everybody thinks differently. But if you form a general guideline for acting properly, have some kind of monitor to make sure nobody's doing something inappropriate. I think that's, but you got to give people freedom, and they are more creative. They can do things. They can generate more income. They can do a whole bunch of wealth creation one way or another.
That's right.
But you can't get everybody to do it the same way.
Right.
And people have to understand that. And that's what bothers me, because you're trying to do a one-way health program.
Right.
But everybody has different needs, different wants, different priorities.
Right.
And why can't we try to work within that guideline?
Well, I think it really goes back to which sector of society is better at doing certain jobs. So we look at the private sector. The private sector, I mean, let's look at, say, the Postal Service versus FedEx, UPS, DHL, on and on and on. There's different approaches. Each company is going to have a different model. Now, who's doing a better job at that? I mean, it's like, to me, that's just one example of that. And I think, again, if you look at healthcare, I think a monolithic model is not the way to go, because, we're a large society, we're an aging society, but we've got different people at different age points, different issues. And I think to have this one model, it doesn't work. And again, that's that view of, is it grounded in reality or just sort of this philosophical, and again, that's a centralized, where it's like the one person in the room pushing the levers and the buttons. We're going to make this thing work. It doesn't,
work.
We're not robots, right?
That's right.
And I think that's really the American way. The American way, it's like, what is the American dream? It's about opportunity. I'm going to work hard, create a business, or I'm going to do good at my job, whatever that is, and give me the opportunities to do that. But as we put more and more burden on the system, and also shrink the private sector while we enlarge the public sector, there's less and less opportunity for that.
It's not going to do it.
And I think that's a problem for every American, and I hope, and that's why I do the show, because it's a wake-up call that, in essence, you think about democracy, you think about our republic. We've got to fight for that every day, because the forces, of just friction, in essence, are to wear that thing down. You know, the longer we move from our foundation.
So our audience should listen to you at 9 o'clock on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
TNT is how we've got all these little acronyms. So Tuesday, Thursday,
Thursdays.
and in the middle is at 9,
Okay.
1590 a.m. and WSMNradio.com.
Maybe we'll solve the problem of the world, huh?
Well,
or at least make them aware of them.
Well, that's it. That's
Well,
it.
very good. Thank you very much,
Oh,
Jim,
my pleasure,
for,
Carl. Yeah,
coming on.
good to be with you. Yeah.
And thank you for listening in. And don't forget that the Nashua Republican City Committee sponsors different events. Go to NashuaGOP.org to find out what's on our calendar. In August, we'll have a big fundraiser with Alan West as our main speaker. Thank you very much for listening in.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.